want to study the Assalâyana Sutta, M93, the discourse to Assalâyana. This is found in the SD 40.2, chapter 2 of Sutta Discovery, volume 14. This is quite a long sutta, but today we will kind of summarize it to fit our time. It's about the nature of class, birth, and rebirth. And there are some very interesting issues here, social historical issues. For example, the Buddha knew, according to Sutta, we can say the Buddha knew something about Greek culture, for example, as we will soon see. When we study the suttas of early Buddhism, we must always remember the social background from which Buddhism arises. Many of the people who come to see the Buddha, they come from a wide range of social background. And I suspect they don't just come from India, but they also came from the West, or probably from the East also. Take for example the two brothers, Tapusa and Balika, the very first two lay people who met the Buddha. At the time there were no monks yet, so they only took two refuges. They probably came from northeast India, in other words, towards the Bengal area. According to the Burmese, the Myanmarese, they say that these two merchants came from Myanmar. So we can say basically they came from the eastern side, which is nearer to us. In this sutta, however, and a number of other suttas, we can surmise, we can guess that probably people from the west, Iran, Mesopotamia, even came to see the Buddha, because in later times we do have historical records. People from Greece and Rome were present in the empires of India. So this is one of the earliest records we have where there's some kind of, we know of some kind of contact between the West, meaning Greek culture, and Indian culture. Of course, the sutta is not just about foreign contexts. There are some deeper teachings which we'll look into as we study the sutta. And the translation starts on page 59, the discourse to Assalâyana. Assalâyana is the name of a brahmin youth, an intelligent young brahmin, a very sensible young brahmin. And let's look at the start of the sutta. Section 1.1, thus have I heard. At one time the Blessed One was staying in another Pindika's monastery park in Jeta's Grove near Sāvatthī. Now at that time, some 500 brahmins from various provinces were staying in Sāvatthī on some business or other. Of course, when we say brahmin, the business usually would be some religious rituals or gathering. Then it occurred to those brahmins, this recluse Gautama prescribes purity for the four classes. Or we can also translate this line as, he declares that the four classes are pure. So we have a kind of objection for the Brahmins, because the Brahmins, you know, they believe in a class system. They believe they are the highest class, and all the others are below them. So when they heard that the Buddha teaches such a teaching, they felt that somebody should rebut him. Okay? Now, the fact that they are not from Sāvatthī shows that they don't really know the fame and the wisdom of the Buddha, right? And this will become evident because in the next section, they approach this young Brahmin youth. When you see the word Manava, it's like a title for a young Brahmin student. Now he's said to be 16 years old, but he's very well versed in the Brahmin teachings. In other words, they spend their whole life studying the suttas. So let's say if he is 16 years old, maybe he spent 8 years, like at the time of primary school, just studying, memorizing, chanting the Brahmin teachings. So, in other words, he's well versed, he's memorized all his teachings, although he's 16 years old. Look at 3.2. Now, at that time, a 16-year-old Brahmin youth named Assalâyana, young, shaven-headed, was staying at Sāvatthī. Okay, now next is his qualification, right? These are all very important aspects of the sutta. Because the sutta is basically literature, narrative, so this verse establishes his qualification. He was a master of the three Vedas. Three Vedas are ancient teachings of the Brahmins, mostly verses, along with their invocations and rituals. Phonology means sounds, how to pronounce the right sound, and etymology means origin of words, and the Itihasa Puranas as the fifth. These are like folklores, stories of ancient heroes and so on. Learned in the Vedic Padas are verses, a grammarian, and well versed in nature law. This is something like about the nature of the universe and so on, what we today might call cosmology. And the marks of a great man. Now, this last phrase is a bit controversial. You see this only in the Buddhist texts. Nowhere in the Brahmanical texts, apparently, we have this kind of record where the Brahmins know of the marks of a great man, Mahapurusa Lakkhana. This is one of those mysteries which are still not clearly solved. One possibility, I think, when the Buddha uses the word Brahmin, it includes not only the priests of India, but any kind of priest who have power. So that means this includes the priests of even in Mesopotamia and the areas to the west of India. As we know, in Mesopotamian culture, the priests were very powerful too. Right? So they could have got the idea from there. And of course, probably the Mesopotamians also, they were probably, the priests at least were from the Aryan stock. So the idea of the great man probably are rooted in the Middle East, if it's not found in India. These are, as I said, these are conjectural and a very interesting thing about. And if you want more details, you can read the sutta on the marks of the great man, the Assalâyana Sutta, for example. So basically, he's a very learned young man who has memorized lots of teachings. So these Brahmins approach him and say, "Can you please go to the Buddha, and defeat him, prove him wrong, that the Brahmins, are the highest classes, the highest class, and the rest are all low class. Prove him wrong." So this is what the young Brahmin says. Look at 4.1. Then the Brahmins approached the Brahmin youth Assalâyana and said to him, "Master Assalâyana, this recluse Gautama prescribes purity for the four classes. Come now, Master Assalâyana, refute the recluse Gautama regarding the statement." When this was said, the Brahmin youth Assalâyana said this to the Brahmins: "Sirs, the recluse Gautama is a Dharma speaker, and Dharma speakers are difficult to refute." Right? So this is a very important line. In other words, Assalâyana, who is a native of Sāvatthī, he knows the fame and the wisdom of the Buddha. He says, "Do you know this? The Buddha, he's a very good Dharma teacher of truth. And so far, nobody has proven him wrong. Nobody has refuted him. I will not be able to refute the recluse Gautama regarding this statement." So this young Brahmin youth, this Brahmin student, knows his position. He says, "No, I don't think I can do that." Then the second time, the Brahmins told him, "You must go and defeat him." And again he says, "No." Third time, 3 requests. So as you know, in ancient India, after 3 requests, you usually would take it up. Of course, in the Buddha, you could remain silent 3 times. That means you won't answer the question. But in this case, this section is a bit humorous. Look at 4.7. when this was said, in other words, the third time this Brahmin urged the Brahmin youth to debate the Buddha and defeat him. When this was said, the Brahmin youth Assalâyana said this to the Brahmins: "Surely, sirs, I'm not getting through to you." He's a bit upset. He's saying like, it's really hard to make you understand. Okay? When I say that the recluse Gautama is a Dharma speaker, and Dharma speakers are difficult to refute, I will not be able to refute the recluse Gautama regarding these statements. This statement, even then, says, I will go at your bidding. But since you are really determined that I go, okay, I will go. Right? So he very resignedly, he decided to go. In fact, you might say, in a sense, it's the Brahmins who's sending this young boy to debate with the Buddha, and this young boy says, "Oh dear, no, I'm really in trouble." Right? So later you see he actually says the Buddha is right. But that's right at the end of the sutta. Let's not jump so far yet. No? So he approaches the Buddha and exchanges greetings with the Buddha as usual, and then he begins the debate. So look at 5.2. Seated thus at one side. So he's respectful of the Buddha. Right? He doesn't stand in front of the Buddha to debate. He sits at one side in a proper way. The Brahmin youth Assalâyana said this to the Blessed One: "Master Gautama, the Brahmins say this." But he doesn't say I say this, it says the Brahmins say this. Okay? The Brahmins is the best. The Brahmin is the best class. Any other is inferior. The Brahmin is the fair class. Any other class is dark. Only Brahmins are pure or purified, not the non-Brahmins. Brahmins are Brahmas or God's own sons, the offspring from his mouth, born of Brahma, created by Brahma, the heirs of Brahma. What does the Master Gautama say here? Right? Of course, today we have these modern Brahmins. They say that only they believe in a true God, and they are the only ones that God will save, and so on and so forth. It sounds quite familiar, huh? So, what does the Buddha say? Now, the Buddha answers. Section 5.3 says, "Now, Assalâyana, we can see the brahminis, the wives of the Brahmins, who have seasons. Seasons is periods, and bear children and give suck. And yet these yoni-born or womb-born Brahmins say, the Brahmins are the best class, born of God, and so on and so forth." No? So this reply is very famous because the Buddha mentioned this reply elsewhere, for example in the Assalâyana Sutta also. Right? So here the Buddha is given a very direct, simple, biological, scientific reply. The Brahmins say they are born from God. Then the Buddha says, these Brahmins are wives, don't they? And if you see the Brahmins, they are born just like any other human being. They are born from the womb, they come through the birth canal, and then they are born. So what's the big deal here? So this very first reply is good enough already, right? That the Brahmins, like everyone else, are born in the same way. So what makes them so different? How can they say they are born of God, right? Their commentaries are not so gracious, and not so compassionate. The commentaries, in a sense, make fun of this, of the Brahmin. They say these Brahmins don't realize that they are born from the female organ, for example. They say, so it's very strange for the Brahmins to talk like this, right? So anyway, it is good enough to understand here the Buddha is saying the equality of human beings. We are all born biologically. We start from the same point, so to speak. Here, of course, the young Brahmin cannot just admit defeat, because the other 500 Brahmins also watching. Okay? So he says, 6.1, although Master Gautama speaks thus, the Brahmins here still think that the Brahmins are the highest class, born from God, heir of God, of Brahma, and so on. Okay? Notice here again how Assalâyana speaks. He doesn't speak for himself. He says the Brahmins here are not convinced. So what it's trying to say is, I don't think the Brahmins are convinced, so can you give more arguments? Right? Then the Buddha goes on next. If the first argument is biological, the second one, 6.2, can be said to be social, societal. Okay, that's doing with about class. Look at 6.2. What do you think, Assalâyana? Have you heard that in Yona, Cambodia, and the countries beyond the borders, there are only two classes, that is, master and slave. Having been masters, they are slaves. Having been slaves, they are masters. Okay? Then the Brahmin will say, yes, I've heard of this. Okay? But the Brahmins are still not convinced. Okay? Now, this is the very significant verse which I'm talking about, how there is contact between West and India. Okay? Notice, Yona refers to another word for it is Iona in Greek. Okay? It either refers to the Greek in the northwest or to the Greeks further west, or the Greeks in general like. We are not so sure about this, but I think we can safely say it's just a word meaning the Greeks, right? Just like we say in Chinese, we say the red hat people. So it can be anyone, it can be those locally or those in the West also, right? So in other words, whichever interpretation, whichever meaning we accept, we can say that the Buddha, the suttas, were aware that the Greeks were nearby, meaning across the border or a little further on. And then there is Cambodia. Of course, today we know Cambodia as the name of Cambodia, right? So this is the origin of the name. This Cambodia, they were actually a group of tribes, very fierce warring tribes, and they live in the mountains of the Hindu Kush, around where Afghanistan is today, if you like. And these tribes are still there today, by the way. They are fiercely independent, that even Alexander couldn't defeat them. Because they live in the mountains, and they were very good horsemen. So you just come charging, fighting, and then off they go again like that. So it's very difficult to fight such people. So in the end, Alexander didn't really defeat them, sort of made peace with them. Okay? So these Cambodians also had two classes. In Greece also, they only had two classes, master, slaves. Okay? And in Cambodia also, master, slave. And sometimes this can switch around, depending on who owes money, for example. Right? So what the Buddha is saying is, if we talk about universal realities, you find the four classes is not universal. It's only in India currently, among the Brahmins idea. But if you talk about a natural situation, there are only two. The rulers, if you like, the masters, and the workers or the slaves. Okay? So that's more natural. And even then, the Buddha says, you're not born into these classes. It depends on what happens to you. For example, maybe you owe money, then you can't do that, you have to serve the family. Or maybe you're conquered by this foreign country, then you become their slaves and so on. But then you can, in a sense, buy out your freedom later on. So, what the Buddha is saying is not something permanent. You're not born into it, so to speak. In fact, here, what the Brahmins are saying is it's not so much an ethical idea of class, because according to Buddhism, whether you are born rich or poor, you're good looking or not, in many ways, result from your past karma. But the Brahmins have no such idea. They say, well, we're born from God, that's all. So we are lucky to be born of God, and you are not. So they have this kind of idea by chance, if you like. It's nothing to do with good and bad. And they are the ones who, in a sense, define good and bad. Anyway, Assalâyana says, well, the Brahmins are not convinced, so the Buddha, what he's trying to do is trying to make the Buddha gives as many examples as possible. And this is a very common situation in debates. Very often you find some of these questioners, like King Piya Tan, he won questioning the monk who was answering his question. He went on asking questions right to the end, long list of questions. Then at the end of it, he says, "Oh, actually, after hearing your first answer, I was already convinced. But I want you to give me all these answers because I want to hear that teaching." So here we have a similar situation where Assalâyana, in a sense, wants the Buddha to give all the possible arguments so that he himself can learn. So he's very interested in learning. Alright, now this is the first part. We have finished the first part, arguments given by the Buddha, arguments from birth. In the second part, we have what is called the bad karmic cycle or karmic cause cycle, second part. Look at 7.1. Okay, 7.1, the Assalâyana says the Brahmins are still not convinced. Then 7.2, the Buddha continues. What do you think, Assalâyana? Is it that only a Kshatriya, that is a warrior class member, who destroys life, takes the not given, commits sexual misconduct, speaks falsehood, speaks maliciously, speaks harsh words, speaks frivolously, is covetous, has a heart of ill will, holds wrong views, who, with the bodies breaking up after death, would be reborn in a plane of misery, a bad destination, a lower realm in hell, but not a Brahmin? Okay, now this is a very long sentence. This is one of the problem with the oral tradition sometimes. The sentences are very long. So here what I've done is, I have structured the sentence so you look at it, it's very easy. What you look at the first line is the question, and then you have what I call the 10 bad karmic causes, the 10 kinds of bad actions which have karmic results, right? Killing, stealing, and so on. So these are the 10. So the question the Buddha is asking is a rhetorical question. Is it only one of the first class, that is the Kshatriyas, the nobles, if they break any of these 10, if they commit any of these 10 bad karmic actions, are they the only ones who will be reborn in an unhappy state, in a painful state? Right? So the first question. Then second question, 7.3, the same format. This time it is the Vaishya. The Vaishya is a member of the business class. Is it only some of the merchant class? If they break any of these 10 precepts, if you like, call it precepts, they commit any of these 10 bad actions, is it only they who go into a suffering state? Right? Suffering state here, a place of misery, right? And not a Brahmin, right? A Brahmin doesn't go, so only a Kshatriya would go to the suffering state. Only a Vaishya or a merchant would suffer the effects of the bad karma. Then 7.5, Assalâyana replies, says, no indeed, Master Gautama. Right? So he says basically, even when a Kshatriya breaks any of these 10 precepts, or a Vaishya breaks any of the 10 precepts, or a Brahmin breaks any of these 10 precepts, they all will go to a suffering state alike. So here we see, in other words, although he's a Brahmin, this Assalâyana, he accepts or he understands the nature of karma, that it works on everyone equally. So in a sense, you might say he's not exactly an orthodox Brahmin. An orthodox Brahmin probably would not believe that they would suffer from the effect of the karma. Maybe they think that they can do anything they like and karma is no effect on them. This is a very dangerous idea. We sometimes hear this today in Buddhism also, by the way, and we have to be very careful about this. You might hear someone come and tell you, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, they will say, oh, my teacher has attained such a high level of attainment, or even in Zen Buddhism, you might say has attained such a high level of attainment, that he's incapable of doing anything wrong, anything bad. Now, that is a very difficult statement to substantiate, right? So we won't know. The best is that we won't know. But to say this sort of thing is a very serious wrong view. how do we know this person has attained such a level? Even if the person has attained such a level, we cannot say the person can do what he likes. In other words, if he does something wrong, it is skillful means. I mean, this idea of skillful means is totally messed up. It is an excuse for breaking the precepts or doing wrong things. This is definitely wrong. So this is something we must never tolerate. If something is wrong, we definitely cannot say it's all right. Right? So these are some things we have to be very careful about, so that we don't ourselves do not add on to the fight. Right, so any of the four classes, whether a Kshatriya, a Brahmin, a Vaisya or a Shudra, whether some of the noble class, from the priestly class, from the merchant class, or from the worker class, if they commit any of the 10 bad actions, they would be reborn in a suffering state, all the same. Karma acts on all fairly, equally, if you like. Then, the next cycle, number 3, is the good karmic cause cycle. So, of course, it's quite obvious, this is reverse this time. So, we have the 10 good karma. Let's look at the first section. So, in section 8.1, as usual, Assalâyana says, the Brahmins, although the Buddha gives his argument, the Brahmins still hold on to their view that the Brahmins are still the highest class. So basically, Assalâyana is saying, can you give us some more arguments, some more proofs, and teach us some? Then the Buddha continues, 8.2. What do you think, Assalâyana? Is it only the Brahmin who refrains from destroying life, refrains from taking the not given, refrains from committing sexual misconduct, refrains from speaking falsehood, refrains from speaking maliciously, refrains from speaking harsh words, refrains from speaking frivolously, is not covetous, has a heart of loving kindness, holds right views, who with the bodies breaking up after death would be reborn in a state of joy, in a happy destination, in a heaven world, but not a Kshatriya, nor a Vaisya, nor a Shudra, right? So, let's simplify this passage. Is it true that only a Brahmin does good, and in doing good, he is reborn in a happy state? Only this is true? But not in the case of a Kshatriya, who keeps all these 10 precepts, or a Vaisya, or a Shudra. Anyone from any class, even an outcast. If they practice these 10 good karma, they keep these 10 precepts, they will be reborn in a happy state, not just a Brahmin, right? So, indeed, this is what Assalâyana replies. In the later on, you see in section 8.9. Right? So, in other words, Assalâyana says, yeah, of course, anyone from the 4 classes, if they do good, they keep the 10 precepts, they practice the 10 good causes of karma, they will be reborn in a happy state, not just the Brahmins. Then the Buddha goes one step higher, this time to a spiritual level, loving kindness. Loving kindness. Section 9.1. Right here again, 9.1, Assalâyana repeats, saying that the Brahmins are still not convinced. This is an invitation to ask the Buddha to teach some more. Sometimes we wonder on whose side Assalâyana is. In this case, he's actually inviting the Buddha to teach more details. And the audience are the Brahmins, the 500 Brahmins. So the Buddha continues, 9.2. What do you think, Assalâyana? So here you notice, whenever you say the word, what do you think, an important teaching is coming. And not just that, the Buddha is saying something which is universally true. It's not just the Buddha's idea, he says, what do you think? So the Buddha is saying, if you look around you, do you see this? You would see the same truth, wouldn't you? Right? So what do you think as that kind of, it's a code, it's a marker telling us that what the Buddha is going to say after that is a universal truth, a natural truth, not something the Buddha introduced or the Buddha said, this is the law, you must listen to me. Not like that. Yeah? So, let's look at this. 9.2. What do you think, Assalâyana? Is it only a brahmin who is able to cultivate a heart of loving kindness in this region? Free from hate, free from ill will? But not a Kshatriya, nor a Vaishya, nor a Shudra? Right? Of course, the answer is obvious, no? Certainly not Mr. Gautama. Right? Anyone can cultivate loving kindness, no matter what class he's from, or even no class, outcast, you can cultivate loving kindness. So this is repeated throughout here. And then, again, Assalâyana says, well, the Brahmins are still not convinced. And so the Buddha continues. This time the Buddha is talking about self-purification. Right? It's the fifth set of arguments called the self-purification cycle. These subtitles are given by the translator here. 10.2. What do you think, Assalâyana? Is it only a brahmin who, taking a sponge bath or a loofah, it's like a little scrub, this soft little piece of sponge, and bath powder, going to the river, who is able to wash off dust and dirt, and not a Kshatriya, nor a Vaishya, nor a Shudra? Of course, here the Buddha is using more like a parable here. He says, is it only a brahmin who has dirt on his body, goes to the river and he washes himself, he becomes clean? Is it only in the case of the brahmins? It's not at all. Even the Kshatriya, brahmin, Vaishya or Shudra, whoever goes down the river gets this piece of sponge with some soap powder, rub himself clean, he will be clean, right? There's no special quality of the brahmin. Of course, you may say, okay, yeah, that's quite natural, but that's not the only parable the Buddha is using. He's bringing some more argument. He's going to go deeper. So he's beginning on a very simple level. He's saying that anyone who goes to the river to wash himself, he will be clean. Clean only of the body. In a sense, the Buddha also is hinting that when you go to the river to wash, anyone can be clean. Some of the ancient Brahmins believe that if you go to the river, especially a holy river, you come out, just by going to the water, you come out, all your sins and evil will be washed away. So here the Buddha is just refusing to mention that. He's just saying you go there to wash yourself away, your bodily dirt, not spiritual impurities. Right? That's the best the water can do, in other words. But the water cannot purify you of your bad karma, cannot purify you of your negative thoughts, for example. Right? Now, the sixth set of argument. This time it goes a little deeper. This time the example given is about, again, equality of the classes. Okay? 11.2. What do you think, Assalâyana? Here, the head anointed Kshatriya Raja, the properly enthroned king, were to have assembled 100 men from various births, saying, "Come, sirs, those who are here born into the Kshatriya class, a Brahmin family, a royal family, take or bring along an upper fire stick of teak, of sal, of sarah, or sandalwood, or patmaka, and produce some heat." Okay, so the king says, "Okay, bring an upper stick." That means this, the one they use for rubbing. So the top stick, and then there is a bottom stick. So this top stick is a very good stick. So we know from here the kind of wood which is of high quality in the Buddha's time. There is teak, the sal tree also has got very good wood, the saral tree, sandalwood tree, patmaka, and so on. So it says, okay, he gets all these high-class people, Kshatriya, Brahmins, royalty, they bring a stick of good wood and make a fire. So use that wood, make a fire. Then he also orders those born, I'm reading 11.4 now, 11.4, and Card 2 says those here born into an outcast or Chandala family, trapper family, a weaker worker family, a cutthroat family, a scavenger family, these are all outcasts, regarded as outcasts in Buddha's time. Take an upper stick, upper piece of wood for making fire, made from the wood from a dog's trough, a piece of wooden trough for dogs to eat, so that's of course very poor wood. A pig's trough, a refuse bin, castor oil wood. Castor oil wood is not very good wood, and start a fire, produce some heat. So here we have two groups of people: high class people with very good wood, low class people with very poor kind of wood. Make fire. Then the Buddha says they all make fire. The fire that is made by both groups, under the same fire, we give heat, there's flame. Is there any difference? Then, of course, Assalâyana has to admit there's no difference between the two. Fire is fire, right? Whether it's made by a high-class person born from powerful family, rich family, and so on, using very good wood, and it's poor person from a low class using low-class wood. The fire that is produced is fire. It gives heat, it gives light, right? So no difference, right? So what is the meaning of this parable? Everyone, all human beings are born equal in the sense that they are capable of changing themselves if they want to, and if they do good karma will come to them. If they do bad karma will come to them. There is no difference. It doesn't mean if you're born into a priestly family, no bad karma will come to you no matter what you do. There's no such thing. Then the Buddha goes a little further. This time it's like going back to these social arguments, the intermarriage cycle. And then this section seems to be, it's not out of place here if you notice. The way the Buddha's, the arguments the Buddha is giving is going higher and higher, deeper and deeper, but suddenly here you have this intermarriage argument coming in. But anyway, let's look at it. Again, the Assalâyana tells the Buddha the Brahmins are not convinced, so the Buddha comes with another argument. Here it's as if the Buddha is using something which is more familiar to the Brahmins, marriage and birth of children. And this also gives us an idea of how the Brahmins view intermarriage and how the Kshatriyas view intermarriage. Look at 12.2. What do you think, Assalâyana? Here, Kshatriya youth were to consort with a Brahmin maiden, and as a result of their consorting, a son were born. Should the son born of the Brahmin maiden by the Kshatriya youth be like the mother or like the father? Or should he be like, or should be called a Kshatriya or a Brahmin? Right? So here you have, notice here it says, the boy, the male is a Kshatriya, but the female is a Brahmin. Okay? Sort of mixed class. A child born from mixed class. So, Assalâyana replies, 12.4 replies, the son, Master Gautama, born of the Brahmin maiden by the Kshatriya youth, should be both like the mother and like the father. He should be called Kshatriya and Brahmin too, right? So here we see the Brahmins are more open about marriage, because in this case it's special because it's a Brahmin, the father is a Brahmin. Okay? So if the father is a Brahmin, they accept the child also to be a Brahmin. But since the mother is Kshatriya, it's also Kshatriya. So in other words, they are quite... Sorry?
The mother is Brahmin.
Yeah. Sorry, in this case, the father is a Kshatriya, but the mother is a Brahmin. So as long as one of the parents is a Brahmin, they accept the child. Okay? But as you know, among the Kshatriyas, they are even more fussy about class. For example, they will never allow a non-Kshatriya to marry into their clan. And you know, there's this notorious story of King Pasenadi who asked for a woman from the Sakya clan to marry. And the Sakyas were at a loss. They just feel they should not do that. But if they don't give a woman for the king, Asinadi, then the king might get angry and attack them. So they bluff their way. They said, here is a woman, is a daughter of one of the royalties that actually she's a class woman. So they kept quiet about it. And then the king, and Prince Vidudaba was born from that. And later Vidudaba found out about this, he was very angry, and he tried to massacre the Sakyas. So this is quite a big deal with the Kshatriyas. In fact, they are more caste-bound than the Brahmins. Of course, the Buddha has left that kind of tribe, so whereas the Buddha, he totally disregards, he rejects this class system. Then the Buddha continues, 30.1. What do you think, Assalâyana? Here a Brahmin youth were to consort with a Kshatriya maiden. So here this time you have the boy, the father is a Brahmin. Okay? And then the girl is a Kshatriya. And they have a son. So the Buddha says, what do you think in this case? The child, is the child Brahmin or Kshatriya? So here again, the Assalâyana gives the same reply. It says, look at 13.3. The son, Master Gautama, born of the Kshatriya maiden by the Brahmin youth, should be both like the mother and like the father. He should be called a Kshatriya and a Brahmin too, right? So same answer as the previous, right? So in an intermarriage, they have the qualities of both the classes. Then the Buddha gives a very interesting response. 40.1. What do you think, Assalâyana? Here a man were to mate with an S, and as a result of the mating, a foal is born. Okay? So you have a female horse and a female S. Right? They mate and then the baby is born. So what kind of child is that? So here, should the foal be like the father or like the mother? In other words, should be a man, a horse rather, or an S. Okay? So here, in a sense here, Assalâyana is caught. So he replies, he says, 40.2, on account of the crossbreeding, he should be called a mule. Now, as you know, a mule is kind of regarded as a crossbreed, not a quality animal, like neither like the father nor the mother. Now, I have a problem with this parable here, because there's no other explanation. Here, the Buddha says, 40.3, for here, Master Gautama, the reason for the difference, but I see no reason for any difference in the other two cases. Okay, that gives us a bit of understanding in this parable, because if you look at this parable, the Buddha seems to be affirming the Kshatriya idea of class. Because in the case of human beings, they have both the qualities of two classes, which is natural. But a horse and a man, a horse and an ass, somehow we call the offspring by a different name. Okay? So we're left to interpret this on our own. There's no other details given. So we can say one possible meaning is it's just a name we give to this mule. But the mule, in a sense, may have qualities of both the horse and the ass. But here, what I think the Buddha is trying to impress indirectly on Assalâyana is that the Brahmins don't really have this clear idea about class, because they allow intermarriage. In another sutta, this is also made clear. Okay? If I'm not mistaken, it could be the Tivuja Sutta, I think, where the Buddha says that the Brahmins would allow intermarriage, but not the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas will always maintain their class. So in that sense, the Kshatriyas are more pure. If you talk about purity, the Buddha is not saying either class is right. He's saying, if for argument's sake, if you talk about class purity, the Kshatriya will be more pure, because the Brahmins accept cross breeding, intermarriage. So here basically what the Buddha is arguing is just saying that, what is all this idea about class purity? It doesn't make sense. We should not be bothered by it. Then comes the moral argument. This is, I think it's a new section. Argument 7, if you like. This whole section is on mantras. 15.1. What do you think, Assalâyana? Suppose there were two brothers, two Brahmin youths, who are uterine brothers, that means born from the same mother, and one is an initiated reciter of the Vedas, the other neither initiated nor a reciter. Right? So one brother has been made a priest. He's able to memorize all those prayers and chants, and the other one is not. He's not a religious person. Okay? The two of them. 15.2. Now here, says the Buddha, which would the Brahmins first feed the ancestral offerings? Sutta. This Sutta, last age short, Sutta. Ancestral offerings. Or the fire oblation, Talipaka. Or the sacrifice, Yanya. Or the guest meal, Bahuna. Now you know in the qualities of the Sangha, we have Pahuneyo, right? Pahuneyo means worthy of the guest offering. So notice here, in ancient India, guests are sacred, so they would offer special meal for the guests. The Brahmins especially, the kind of food they offer to the guests, very special. To other Brahmins is called Bahuna. Right? So, who would the Brahmins serve first with all the proper food? And of course, Assalâyana replies, he would offer the proper food to the initiated brother, the one who is a reciter. Because to the Brahmins, there is more benefit in giving to such a person. Then the Buddha says, now the Buddha continues, 16.1, what do you think, Assalâyana? Suppose here there were two Brahmin youths who are uterine brothers. One is an initiated reciter of the Vedas, but immoral. Okay, so he doesn't give the precepts, he breaks the precepts, bad by nature. But the other is not a reciter and not initiated, but he is moral, virtuous by nature. So here you have someone who is a religious person but immoral. Okay, doesn't keep the precepts. The brother is not a religious person, not a priest, but keeps the precepts. Now the question the Buddha asks is this. Which, 16.2, here, which would the Brahmin first serve, the ancestral offering, or the fire oblation, or the sacrifice, or the guest meal? And Assalâyana has to reply, here, Master Gautama, it is the Brahmin youth who is uninitiated and a non-reciter, morally virtuous, good by nature, who would be first fed with all those proper food. So here, this is interesting because there is still some universal order of good, even among the Brahmins and among the Brahmins. Because in the case of the Brahmin, even when the offering is to be given, here you have this priest who is immoral, but here an uninitiated person who is not a priest but is moral. The priest would offer to the second person, not to the first person. Right? So here, at least in the case of Assalâyana, he accepts this. He says, yeah, the Brahmins will offer to the moral person, not to the immoral priest. Now, we're not sure how other Brahmins will answer, but we can say that this Assalâyana, he is the new Brahmin, if you like, the one who is open-minded, who sees natural teachings, natural truth, rather than purely following the ancient traditions of the Brahmins. Okay, so now the Buddha is coming near to his finishing all the arguments, if you like. So this last question, right? The Buddha says, which person with the Brahmin offer? To the initiated priest or to the uninitiated good person? And Assalâyana says that the Brahmins will offer to the uninitiated good person. Now the Buddha gives what we say as the clincher, right? 17.1. First, Assalâyana, you took your stand on birth. Going from birth, you took a stand on mantras. Going from mantras, you took a stand on asceticism. Going from asceticism, you went back to your stand on the purity of the four classes. This is what I have prescribed. When this was said, the Brahmin youth sat cross-legged, silent, dismayed, his shoulders drooping, hanging his head downcast and bewildered. Right? So in other words, here the Brahmin says, well, you follow your argument. The things that you say and considering the last statement you made, don't you think you have contradicted yourself? Right? If you say the Brahmin are the highest class, and you also say that there are bad Brahmins whom other Brahmins won't serve, and they would rather serve the good Brahmins, so don't you think this kind of way of talking contradict each other? So now you have Assalâyana is caught, he can't say anything, and this verse where he sits, feeling downcast and so on, this is again a quote in oral literature to show that he admits defeat. He finally, silently declares he has lost the debate. Okay? But remember, in this case, what kind of person was Assalâyana? He's a good person. At least from the sutta, we can guess he was a good person who doesn't want to debate with the Buddha, who knows the Buddha is very wise. He tells the Brahmin 3 times, don't debate with the Buddha, you will lose. But forced by the Brahmins, he went anyway. And here, he's right. Okay? In fact, later on you see he is converted. Okay? But anyway, we are nearly finished now, but still a bit more to go. So this is the turning point, in other words. The young Brahmin admits defeat. So this time, the Buddha goes away from giving all those argumentations. He gives a bit of history, if you like. 18.1. Once upon a time, Assalâyana, when 7 Brahmins or rishis were consulting one another in a leaf hut in the forest dwelling, a bad wrong view such as this arose to them. The Brahmins the best class, the others is inferior, and so on and so forth. They're born from God and so on. Same wrong views as the Brahmins earlier mentioned in the sutta held. So these Brahmins, some of them, they were very famous. So they were in this leaf hut in the forest. And then outside there was this seer, Asita Devala. Now Asita Devala, although he's a Brahmin, he is dark skinned. He's not fair skinned as a Brahmin. So he was outside. 18.3. Now the seer Asita Devala the dark, heard these 7 Brahmins, 7 seers inside the hut having all these wrong views. That Brahmins are highest class and they are fair skinned and so on. Remember, Asita is dark skinned, right? 18.5. Then Assalâyana, the seer Asita Devala, having groomed his hair and beard, dressed in crimson cloth, put on a multi-layered sandals, taken his golden staff, appeared in the compound of the Brahmin seers. Right? Remember, he's also a Brahmin seer, just like the rest. So he appears, he visits the 7 seers. And 18.6, then Assalâyana, while the seer Asita was walking up and down in the 7 Brahmin seers compound, he said this: where now have these worthy Brahmins seers gone? Where now have these worthy Brahmin seers gone? So where are the Brahmins? So he's just calling them out. He knows they're there, but he's just calling them out. 18.7. Then Assalâyana, this occurred to the 7 Brahmin seers. Now who's this walking up and down in the 7 Brahmin seers compound like a village lout, right? So he's looking down, who's this walking outside like a hooligan? So he looks down here because he's dark skinned. 18.8, let us put a curse on him. I mean, they're so terrible. They got so upset, and they put a curse. So they started cursing this dark-skinned Asita 18.9. The curse goes like this: turn into ash, lowly wretch. Turn into ash, lowly wretch. May you become ash. In other words, you burn up, you become ash. But what happens is, look at 1810. But Assalâyana, the more the 7 brahmins, seers, curse the seer Asita Devada, all the more calmly, all the more lovely, all the more charming the seer Asita Devada became. Why is that so? Because Asita Devada was practicing loving kindness. Although his curse is just kind of some loving kindness. And so it became calm and peaceful. This brahmin were not cursing, it didn't work. Right? And that's an important lesson here. If anybody tries to harm us, tries to, especially by saying nasty words, you don't get angry, don't get upset, you won't be affected. Right? This happens in a quarrel. People say nasty things, they look at you in the face, they want you to get angry. And when you get angry, they're satisfied. But if you don't get angry, then they will feel defeated. So this is the way, have loving kindness. Don't play the anger game. 18.11. Then it occurred to the 7 brahmin seers, empty indeed is our asceticism, fruitless indeed is our holy life. Of course, at least they accepted this. They say, wow, look at us, we can't, our curse doesn't work anymore. So we have not really benefited from all this practice and training we've been doing. Right? It says, in the past when we cursed somebody, it really worked. But now it doesn't seem to work at all. So then only they ask this Asita, who are you? And so on. Then Asita said, well, Asita introduced himself, that he's also a seer, the brahmin. And then only they realized they are wrong, and they properly saluted, paid respects to this Asita Devada. But in a sense, these 7 seers, although they appear to be bad, they were sensible people. They do respect those worthy of respect. Right? So this is a story the Buddha told. The Buddha tells to Assalâyana. So he's saying that even in the past, number 1, not all the brahmins were fair-skinned. And number 2, when they were wrong, they accepted it and they respected the true teacher. So basically here, what is meant here is that although Asita Devada is dark-skinned, he's still a holy man. And that's the whole point. That you respect a person not because he's white-skinned or dark-skinned, but he is a holy man in fact and in practice. And so the next point the Buddha raises is almost a scientific one, if you like, the nature of conception. How is a child born? Right? So here the Buddha mentioned this idea. You might say it sounds very scientific, very advanced for his time. Right? What he's saying is, you are not born pure, you're not born holy, you're not born high class. Because when you're born all the same way biologically. And how is that? Look at 18.26, at the bottom of page 73. Here there is a coming together of a mother and father. It is a mother's season, and there is the presence of the being to be born. The meeting of these 3 is the descent of the being to be born. But sirs, do you know for sure if that being to be born is a kshatriya or a brahmin or a vaisya or a shudra? No, sir, we do not know for sure what kind of this consciousness is to be born, or what class it is. Right? So, this is the same argument used by Asita upon the Brahmins also. So here, what the Buddha is saying is, that's how human beings are born. You must have 3 conditions. Right? First of all, you have father and mother, human beings, parents, okay? Male, female. But this is the ancient way of talking, because today we talk of the male sperm and the female egg. This can be like united in the test tube. But even test tube babies are not exactly test tube babies, because what they actually do here is they harvest the female egg, and then they put in some kind of petri dish in a laboratory, a proper laboratory, and then they put the sperm there, and then once they see that it is united and beginning to develop, then they have to put it back into a surrogate mother. So it's not exactly a test tube baby. Right? The beginning part is test tube baby. Right? But even then, you still talk about male parent, female parent. Okay? So you must have parents, male, female. Then number two, it must be the mother's season. Okay? Of course, number two, in the sense that the egg must be properly produced, right? And then three, this is very interesting. It is the Buddhist idea. There must be a being to be born. There must be this consciousness which is waiting to be born, and then the consciousness descends into this zygote or this fetus, and then a child is born. Otherwise, you have a blue baby. You don't have a living fetus. Okay? So these three conditions must be present. Now then comes a rather enigmatic verse here, 18.29. Now Assalâyana, even the 7 Brahmin seers, on being questioned, cross-questioned, pressed for an answer by the Siyasata Devala regarding their own claims of birth, were unable to explain it. What more of you here? So now the Buddha is addressing the 500 Brahmins present. Well, how will you, when questioned, cross-questioned, pressed for an answer by me on your claim about birth, be able to explain it? You who share the same teaching, but not Punna, the ladder order. Right? Now, okay, first of all, the Buddha said, okay, here's the story. You know, you have the story of Asita Devala. So now I ask you the same question. How do you talk about your birth now? Having known that human birth was simply because of 3 conditions. So it says the same problem arose with the ancient 7 Brahmins. If your ancestors, the famous 7 Brahmins, cannot answer this question, how can you answer them today? Right? So the Brahmins do not know what to answer, in fact. But there is a clause here, but not Punna, the ladder holder. It's a bit enigmatic, a bit not much explanation given. The only explanation given here is Punna, he is very good with the ladle. You know, ladle for making soup. So he takes leaves and he makes some kind of soup for the 7 Brahmins. But he is not their teacher. In other words, probably the hint here is that although he's not a holy man, he doesn't hold this kind of views. So in that sense, he's wiser. Okay, this is one possible interpretation. So what the Buddha is saying, maybe you may not be a Brahmin, you may be a simple, humble cook, you know. If you don't hold all these views, you are much wiser. When this was said, the Brahmin youth, Assalâyana, said this to the Blessed One. Marvelous Master Gautama, marvelous Master Gautama. Just as if Master Gautama were to place upright what had been overturned, or were to reveal what had been hidden, or were to show the way to one who was lost, or were to hold up a lamp in the dark so that those with eyes could see forms. In the same way, numerous way, the Dharma has been declared by the Master Gautama. I go to Master Gautama for refuge, to the Dharma and to the community of monks. May the Master Gautama remember me as a layman who has gone to him for refuge from this day forth for life. So you see here, finally, the Brahmin youth goes to Buddha for refuge. This, in other words, is a public declaration. He accepts the Buddha as his teacher. And remember, who's present here? 500 other Brahmins. And they don't take refuge. I mean, they still kind of held to their views, perhaps, we do not know. But only Assalâyana goes for refuge. So the ending and the beginning connect. You remember at the beginning, Assalâyana already warned the Brahmins, says, no, you'll never be able to defeat the Buddha. In other words, he already, in a sense, has some kind of faith in the Buddha. He knew the Buddha was wise. And he kept to his, Assalâyana kept to his lifestyle, not getting involved in attacking the Buddha. But here comes a Brahmin. It's as if the 500 Brahmins, they were his past good karma, They came and then kind of got him to meet the Buddha. Because once he met the Buddha, he'll become a disciple, right? So it's a very interesting way how sometimes good karma can ripen. In other words, we are challenged to do something we rather not do, right? Assalâyana rather not debate with the Buddha, but he's forced to debate with the Buddha by the 500 Brahmins, who in a sense are like him, they're all Brahmins, So he respects them, he obeys them, he goes and he debates with the Buddha, and as a result that he finally is convinced that he should be a disciple of the Buddha, and he goes for refuge. So in a sense, the bottom line for us here is that sometimes we may face interesting challenges before we can really understand some deeper teachings of the Dharma. And don't be afraid, be humble enough to accept that kind of challenge, even if you think you may be defeated, but yet what you ultimately discover is something actually of a very great victory, of a spiritual nature. So the sutta ends here. Any questions?
So the 4 classes are doing intermarriage?
They do. The 4 members of the 4 castes do intermarry. Yeah. It's just that if they intermarry, usually mixed marriage, so their class may be in question. But in the case of the Brahmin, as long as one of the parents is a Brahmin, they accept the child. But below that, if no Brahmin is involved, neither parents are Brahmins, of course, they are regarded as locals. This is according to the Brahmin belief, but not Buddhist belief. Okay? Any other question?
It's the initiator.
That means initiated means they are made into a priest. They go through the ceremony. The Brahmins, they do some rituals and prayers, and they make this young boy become a Brahmin priest, and it's called initiated. Any other question? No more question, eh?
They don't believe in the initiator, they believe in initiation.
Oh, that's because in the case of the second story, the initiated priest is a bad person. He doesn't keep to all the 10 precepts. He breaks all the 3 of body, 4 of speech, 3 of mind. In other words, a kind of extended form of the 5 precepts. Any kind of bad action. So in other words, the initiated priest, he does bad deeds habitually. Whereas the brother, although he's not a priest, is a good person. He keeps to all the precepts. So when there are offerings to be given, the sensible Brahmins would offer this to the good brother rather than the bad brother. So this is, as we know here, Assalâyana is a sensible young man, so he answered correctly. So of course the Brahmins will offer to the good brother. There might be other Brahmins who are very fanatical that might say, even though this Brahmin does bad things, he's still a Brahmin, so we can offer the offerings to this Brahmin. It's just like the God believers, and they say, if you believe in God, you can break all the laws in the country, you'll still be forgiven by God. The kind of idea, see? So, but here Assalâyana is very sensible. He doesn't say that. He says, well, if you break the law of the country, you're a bad person. You should not do that. If you break in other words, you should respect other people too. Okay, anything else? So no more questions, huh? All right, let us close here, okay? And today is the full moon day, the 7th moon. It's a special day dedicated to recalling the good deeds of our ancestors and sharing our loving kindness with them, even dedicating marriage to them. In the Buddha's teaching, we can only dedicate the marriage if they are born in the Preta world, which is one of the suffering states. If they are born as human beings, they are very according to karma elsewhere. If they are born in the heavens, they are enjoying the happiness. If they are born in lower states, we can only be kind by treating all the other lower forms of life with kindness and compassion. But if they are pretas, they could be hovering around us, troubled and worried. Or they could be in the intermediate state, lost and uncertain, tied down by craving to their old way of life. And we can help them to be confident and inspired and happy, to let go of their attachment to what was in the past. We do this by remembering them, the good things they've done, and by sharing our loving kindness to them, wishing them well and happy. May all our relatives be well and happy. May all our friends, even our enemies, if they are born in the suffering states, in the pretas or the intermediate state, may they be well, may they be happy. By the good deeds they've done before too, may they be liberated from their suffering states. By wishing happiness and goodwill in this way, whether they are relatives, whether they are friends, they will still benefit from our loving kindness. Without loving kindness, none of these prayers would work, all in vain. Loving kindness is the key, is the vehicle with which we dedicate marriage to our ancestors who need them. Reflecting in this way is right view, and this is a very good, very wonderful good karma. But of all such good karma, may we live in this life enjoying here and now good health, happiness, prosperity that will bring us even greater happiness and allow us to study the Dharma effectively and joyfully. And also, by all the good deeds we have done, our practice of the precepts, our practice of generosity, our practice of meditation, and many other good efforts, worthy efforts we are making in the Dharma, we attain spiritual liberation in this life itself, by at least attaining stream winning, or aspiring to attain stream winning. In this moment of peace, let us share our loving kindness with everyone here in this temple, to all the beings here, may they be well and happy, to all our teachers, to all our relatives and friends, may they all be well and happy, and to those whom the Dharma have not touched, that they may see the Dharma and be joyful and liberated, and be good and kind people. May all beings be well and happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.